All right, we are live. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to another Wednesday Live. Today's topic is very timely. I feel like I kind of pivoted. I was going to talk about something else today, and then I usually check the news maybe about once a week. Like I really try to protect my peace, but I kept seeing a lot about, layoffs happening. And I know I did a post about this a while ago because I really want people to be prepared before it happened. As someone who has experienced a layoff, who has gone through that process, I want to provide some tools and information that can help you prepare. Even if you think your job is safe, even if you feel like there is nothing, like you're solid, I want to make sure that you are prepared. I'm very much about you being in a position of power, having clarity and control over your finances. So, what I'm going to walk through today is how do you stay prepared? How do you plan your overall finances to make sure that you know exactly what's going on? And I'm also going to give some tips for the folks who have already gone through the layoff or is even furloughed right now. The uncertainty, not understanding like what's going on and when you're going to be able to go back to work. I want to walk you through some key steps of things that you can do so that you're not left in a situation where you're floundering. And like I said, I've been through this before. I want to share what steps I took and how I was able to prepare in that situation as well. So before I jump in, welcome everyone. My name is Yashika Ma'at. I'm a financial coach and the founder of Jama Wealth Financial. And my main mission is to help you keep more cash in your pocket so you can position it to wealth and create a life of freedom and ease. So when I talk about being prepared is putting you in a position of power, that is making sure that you are financially secure, and not just in terms of your income, but specifically having a plan, understanding your numbers, understanding what's coming in, what's going out, so that if your income were to be done, you have more clarity as to what's happening. So, one of the things that you want to understand, most importantly, what are your housing expenses, right? How much are you paying toward your housing? And not just, okay, I'm paying my mortgage or rent. Are there any maintenance and upkeeps and things that may be potentially happening? You want to factor those in. I use what I like to call it the break the ice budget in case of emergency. So you break it in case of emergency. And essentially what you do is you're putting in a list of your expenses. That's like bare minimum. I like to say start with the bare minimum. But if you're someone who you enjoy your lifestyle and you want to save up enough to make sure that you can continue your lifestyle as well as being able to maintain your bills, then you can certainly do that. But my recommendation would be starting with the bare minimum of what do I need for housing? How much are the costs that I need for my food and utilities? What are the costs that I need for just regular things that may be coming up, extracurriculars for the kids, whatever those things are? Getting clear on how much those expenses actually cost you every single month. I also want to throw in there to be mindful of those expenses that don't happen every month. This is something that I find a lot when I'm coaching clients is you're looking at the month to month expenses, but you forget about the annual car maintenance and tax expenses, or that quarterly home pest expense that you have in your budget. Those are the things that you want to make sure that you are identifying. Because here's the thing, when you know your numbers, when you know, okay, yes, I bring in this amount of income, but I actually only need, 30%, 40% of it to cover my expenses, that's what's going to put you in a position of power, right? You now know, okay, if I get laid off, I have X amount saved up, preferably 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, so that I know that I can be able to continue making my bill payments in this process, whether you're deciding to look for another job, or maybe you want to take some time for a short sabbatical before you hop back into the workforce, right? So that's why having that preparedness is your power. That's where you can maintain your control by having that information ready. And the main thing, because I know we're still on the series of the clarity, so I do want to talk about having that cash flow clarity. If you can understand how much is coming in and what is going out and determine the gap between your income and expenses, that is essentially what I like to call the cash flow. What cash flow are you? Are you cash flow positive? Or are you cash flow negative? If you are cash flow positive, that allows you to have more money to put aside towards your savings and your investing and prepare for the situations like either being laid off from your job or being furloughed. So the main thing when you're, again, listing out those expenses, you're going through and determining on average from month to month, you want to see whether or not you have excess cash left over. And I want to point this out because this is something that I feel like not a lot of people tune into. And I find that with the clients that I'm seeing, it's pretty common from person to person that, especially if you're a high earner and you have credit cards and you feel like you're able to pay your bills on time, but you do use credit cards, I want you to be mindful because a lot of times you may think that you are cash flow positive, but in reality, you are cash flow negative because yes, you've spent your expenses with your out of your overall bank account, but maybe you're using the credit card for a few things here and there or certain purchases. But when you pull out and look at all of your expenses for a particular month, you are actually cash flow negative, meaning you are spending more than your income. And I know it might seem like, well, I'm able to pay my bills off every month. So, I'm good. Yes, you may be good. One month you might have a cash flow positive, another month you might be cash flow negative. But when you look at it in aggregate and you're looking over time, you may see that the end all be all number is actually negative. And one of the tools that I love to use, and I'll make sure I link it down in the comments, is Monarch Money. They have a tab on there, which is essentially a report where you can put your numbers in there and you can look from month to month to see how did I do from a cash flow perspective. And then it even breaks it down for you on, where your money was going, whether you are where your money, if it's going towards groceries, it's a top category. A lot of the top three that you'll probably see is groceries, housing, and maybe some shopping, right? Or dining out, depending on what your preferences or what are the areas that you tend to spend money. But those top three categories, and transportation usually is in the top category. But so if you're someone who you're like, I have no idea what's going on or where my money is going, definitely download Monarch Money. And if you want like real practical experience or some support and understanding, I do have a masterclass next week, the Cash Flow to Clarity Masterclass. And that's where I'm going to be actually breaking down and showing you how to set up your overall finances in a way where you can actually have more control over your money and being able to save and invest, right? But if you're someone right now, you're just like, I just need to see what's going on, I recommend downloading Monarch Money and getting an understanding of what's going on there, okay? The other piece that I want to talk about is why I talk about having more of that clarity. Again, when you're thinking about building wealth and you have the income, your money's flowing and you're paying your bills and you're doing those things, you want to make sure that you are setting aside that money towards your savings and investments. And so, like I mentioned before, when you're looking at that bare minimum budget of what do you actually need, that's a good starting point for you to determine how much do I actually need to save up. Most people, especially if you are married, you may be okay with 3 months. I like to err on the side of 6 months, whether you're married or not, because it still gives you a little bit of leeway. I mean, time flies by. I think that's my thought process. It's like time will fly by, and then before you know it, you're like, what happened? So I would definitely recommend, 3 to 6 months of expenses, depending on your situation. If you are single, definitely 6 months, maybe a little bit more. But I will say with that, it really depends on how much time do you actually want to have in between a particular situation, whether you're getting, whether you've gotten laid off. That's going to determine how long you can actually be without active income coming in and you still being able to maintain your finances. So that's why it's very important to sit down and look at your overall number. Remember, the importance is for you to maintain that power by having clarity as to what's going on with your overall finances. The next thing is to strategically prioritize paying off your debt. I know one of the things that a lot of high earners tend to do is like you have debt, you're not paying it off in real time, but you're like paying it off every single month. I'll tell you what my philosophy is, and then I'll jump back into my point here. My philosophy is if you're using a credit card, treat it like it's a debit card, which means when you make a purchase, once that transaction posts, take the cash and pay off that transaction. That way, there's no surprises when you get that bill and you're like, dang, $1,000. I don't got $1,000 to pay. But if you're doing it in real time, you're using real cash flow from your bank account to pay these things off, and it removes the surprises. But when it comes to your debt, if you already have debt and you're thinking through, I know for me, when I was going through my debt payoff journey, that was one of the fears that I had was like, oh, what happens if I lose my job and I still have all this debt? That was honestly part of the fire underneath me of being focused on paying off that debt, because I didn't want to be in a situation where, I got laid off and then now we have all this debt that we have to manage. You don't want that stress. So I would say if you have debt, definitely think through creating a plan to pay that off. There's two different methods you can use. You can use the snowball method, where you basically just take the balance and order them from smallest balance to highest balance. And then you just take extra money and pour it into that smaller balance. Once that's paid off, then you take that minimum payment plus whatever extra and you add it to the next balance. The point behind that is it's allowing you to knock down those debts, and it gives you a quick win because you're seeing your debt actually decreasing. The other method, if you're more like, I'd rather save more on interest, you're essentially looking at the debt that has the highest interest and attacking that debt. But the whole point I want to make with this is you need to have a plan to make sure that you're able to stay in control and have that clarity to know what's going on as well. I also like to do some what if scenarios. So imagine you got laid off. Like, I want you to run through, like, how would you manage your finances if if you lost your job and now you have to live off of one income, or maybe no income if you're a single individual? These things, like looking through and saying, okay, what if I get laid off? How will I take care of my mortgage or my rent? How will I pay for certain utilities and things? You want to walk through those scenarios so you can kind of think through things on, whether or not you may need to beef up your savings account, right? Maybe 3 months is like, yeah, that'll help me, but it's not going to be enough considering the lifestyle that I have, the expenses that I have. Those are the things that you want to think through so that you can be prepared. And I also want to address the folks who may have already gotten laid off, or maybe you're furloughed right now with the government shutdown going on. But I want to walk you through some steps of things that I did that I would also recommend for folks. If you have just been laid off or you've gone through, I know you've probably been furloughed for a while now, but one of the things that you want to do first is to not panic. I know your nervous system's probably in shock. You're probably thinking like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I just got laid off. I don't know what to happen next. But the best thing to do, because if you got laid off, there's not really much that's going to shift within the day or two that you've gotten laid off, right? So I would recommend using that time to just be like, do some breathing exercises, go see a therapist, exercise, just relax, right? Don't panic. And I would say, especially don't panic and then just start throwing a bunch of money at your debt. Because I know some people might think, oh, I just got laid off. I have all this debt. Let me just throw all my savings. I would not recommend that, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing you. You can always contact the creditors and set up some sort of plan, explain the situation to them, especially if you are furloughed. There are credit card companies where you can call them up and you can let them know that you have been impacted by the government shutdown, and they will work with you to make sure that you have a plan throughout this process. Okay. The other thing that I would recommend if you have gotten laid off, or if you're, like I said, you've already gotten laid off, making sure that you are reviewing your last paycheck, making sure that everything matches up. Did you get your PTO paid out? Look at your severance package. I would highly recommend, before signing a severance package, that you contact an employment lawyer to review it. That is something that I did, just to make sure that, one, I understood what was in the package. I understood the details of what they were asking of me, the amount. It's a really good way just to make sure that you are, one, not leaving money on the table, or that there's not something within that severance package, because you got to think about it. And I know for myself, in that state, even though I kind of knew layoffs were coming, I mean, never in a million years that I think I would have gotten laid off, but it happens, right? Because we all think that our job is secure. We all think that, it may not happen to us. But I will say, in that moment of getting the email in the morning, getting on the call, receiving that information, I actually knew, like, when I saw that call in the morning, I'm like, I remember going downstairs and saying to my husband, I think I'm getting laid off this morning, because who else schedules a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning with HR and the director? Like, like, we know these things are going to happen. But even though I had that thought process, like, I think I'm getting laid off, the aftermath of, like, okay, that actually happened, you're going to be in a state of shock, right? Your mind is going to be scrambling and trying to think through things, because they're going to be talking to HR, and they're giving you the severance letter. And then it's like, okay, you got to start training people and passing your work over to, different areas. It's going to be a lot. So that's why, again, referring back to number one, take time to just relax. I know it's easier said than done, which is why I recommend it. Go see a therapist or a counselor, someone who you can talk through and process what's happening in that moment, because it is something that you definitely want to, and you may go through stages of grief. You may be even for someone who knew, it's like, well, dang, why did I get laid off? You may go through those process, and then there's going to be a point where you have some acceptance too, right? But I would also say, start applying for support programs immediately. So, if you've gotten laid off, make sure that you apply for unemployment, like, right away. Let's get that ball rolling so that you're not, waiting in between whether you decide to find another job. That's going to be something that you want to do as well. This will be the time to then shift to that bare minimum, right? Break the ice bucket in case of emergency. So, like I talked about at the top of this call, having that budget that is a bare minimum of what you actually need to make sure that you are maintaining and keeping a roof over your head and food in your mouth and all those things, you want to revert to that budget. Even if you think, and I want to caution them, even if you think, oh, I can get me another job just like that. Even if you think that you can get another job, I still would recommend living off of the bare minimum budget until you have secured your next position. Because what you don't want is the thinking that, oh, I got this, I can still maintain the lifestyle that I'm living, and then come to find out 3 months later you're still looking for a job. You don't want to be in that situation. The other thing that I would recommend, and I say this over and over again, because I know sometimes when you get laid off, it's kind of like that feeling of, ooh, I don't want to talk to nobody. I don't want to have to answer the questions of, I just got laid off and how it makes you feel and all those things. But I would recommend lean into your network. Go have lunch with some of your connects from different companies. Make sure that you are tapping into individuals who already work for different companies. And I would say this should be something you're doing on the regular, right? Not just when you've gotten laid off, but keeping in connection with your network so that if opportunities arise, you can let them know, hey, I'm looking for work. If you have something that's available, let me know. Honestly, for me, the jobs that I've gotten has been through me being connected with someone and being able to get my resume in front of HR, right? So I would say I would highly, highly recommend, this is not the time to isolate yourself and to, wallow in that, self-pity or shame. It's like, all right, you can take those 48 hours to rest, be to yourself, and then we're going to get back at it. We're going to get back out there and we're going to connect, right? And maybe if you prepared well enough, it may be for you to say, all right, you know what? I'm going to take this time and have a little sabbatical before I jump back into corporate. That's honestly what I did. It's been, that was July of 2023. And I decided I was going to take some time. I think I did unemployment for the last end of the year. I was applying to jobs. And then I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go all in on John My Wealth and start building this business. So you may be someone who have a talent or a skill where you can solve someone's problem. That can be an opportunity for you to make money. If you're not an entrepreneur and you're like, I'm not, because entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. So I'm just going to put that out there. But if you're like, you know what, I definitely want to go back to corporate, then there's your answer to be able to take that next step to move towards getting that clarity. But I say all these things to say the most important thing that you can do to feel empowered and to have that control and confidence as to no matter what happens with your job, whether you've gotten furloughed, is to make sure that you have clarity as to what's happening with your finances and having a plan that's going to give you the confidence that you know is going to help you move forward, or being in this interim phase, especially if you're someone who has been furloughed. This is why I have been talking about clarity over the last few weeks, and I have my Clarity to Cash Flow Masterclass next week. It's because the idea is I want you to be so secure that you do not have to worry about what is happening with the job market or anything like that. Being in control of your finances puts you in a position of power. You can't control what your job is going to do. You can't control what the government is doing, but what you can control is how you're managing your own finances. What you can control is how you're saving and investing to build for you. You've heard me say before, I'm a big proponent of making sure that your money is working for you. And when I say that, that means you are putting aside money in a brokerage account, not just your 401k, because that's the other thing I want to point out. I know if you're investing in your 401k, that is a great thing. Keep doing that. But one of the things you want to be mindful of is if you are laid off and you have your emergency fund and maybe you've tapped that, but you want to have something extra, that brokerage account is going to be a game changer, because that's what I did. Was I had my emergency fund, but then any excess over that I put into the brokerage account that was there, so that if I needed to withdraw from it, that is money that can help support my family. So I would say definitely, if you have not, look into opening a brokerage account. You can put as much money as you want in there. There is no penalties for withdrawing the money. Obviously, depending on how long you hold your investments in there, you may be subject to short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains, depending on, again, how long you have those, depending on when you sell your investments. But those are the things that you can do, that you have control and power over, of how you prepare for your finances, right? If you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the comments. If you are watching the replay, you can drop your questions as well. And I'd also want to know, like, what's your experience of dealing with a layoff or being furloughed? Any tips that you have for the people in the community? Because if you've been through this process, it's definitely, I'm sure you have some things that you did on your journey that could help someone else on their journey, to make sure that they don't have to suffer through this process, that there is a rainbow at the end, that there's gold, or whatever the saying is at the end, where you can get through this and feeling confident that getting laid off is not the end, right? But what's important is that you are taking control. So again, I'd like to invite you to the Clarity to Cash Flow Masterclass next week. I'll be hosting it at noon on Zoom. You have to register. Link will be in the description if you are on YouTube, and I will put it in the comment section if you're watching on LinkedIn. But this is really for you if you are like, all right, I'm in the situation now. I want to know what's going on with my finances, and I want to be able to have a plan of how to structure my money so that I can be more confident as to what's happening. This is something that I do with my clients. This is the first step, where I help them uncover what's going on. And this is where we find about $1,000 to $3,000 of cash flow that's just kind of sucked into different areas. And then once you get control over that, you can then start directing that to build more freedom for you. I'll also be going through my money management system that takes me like very little time to make sure that I'm on track. Again, it's because of the system that I create so that you know exactly what's going on with your finances and it's no more of like, I don't know where my money's going. Like you will be in full control. By the end of that masterclass, you will have an understanding of why you've been stuck and how you can actually create a system that's going to support your life so that you can move forward. Okay. If you guys have any questions, again, I am very just passionate about this. Of the main premise overall is I want you to feel in control. I want you to have that confidence and ease that you are moving towards freedom. Because if you stay ready, what's the saying? You ain't got to get ready, right? And that's what I want for you. I want you to stay ready, maintain that position of power so that you can be certain that you are moving forward with more confidence. Okay? All right, that is it for today's live. I hope to see you in class next week for the Clarity to Cash Flow Masterclass. And until next time, here's to your financial freedom. Peace.